All right. All right. So I have my notes here. I have my notes and the questions here. I'm gonna be holding the mic. I'm gonna be holding the mic. Um, so yeah, I hope this works. So the first one, can you tell me about your background and your family's connection to immigration? Sure. My family is really at the heart of what I do. My background is rooted in immigration. My parents came here to the United States like so many other families, just hoping for an opportunity for a better life. I was lucky enough, out of pure luck, to be born here in the United States. And my parents came determined to build something better for themselves and for their kids. I grew up watching them navigate systems that weren't built for them, learning English on the go, working insanely long hours, and constantly trying to stay together and to find a way to move forward. I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles. My dad works in construction or like HVAC, and my mom worked a couple of different jobs, and ultimately was a stay-at-home mom to raise me and my siblings throughout time while we were in grade school. Even as a kid, I understood the weight that they carried. Fuck. Even as a kid, I understood the weight that they carried, knowing that their status, they are resident. My parents are green card holders. They are permanent residents here in the United States, but knowing that that status could eventually be temporary or is always at risk. One encounter with law enforcement, one parking ticket, anything can kind of set them up for a run-in with the immigration system here in the United States. And especially now, during these times, they are even more fearful. And that permanent residency doesn't necessarily mean as much safety as it used to. But my parents and my family is a huge part of what I do. As a photographer, I try to document the humanity that often gets left out of conversations, specifically conversations around immigration. And as an advocate, I feel responsibility to push back against negative rhetoric in the media and in our communities that reduces our communities to numbers and headlines, or just political talking points. My family story is part of a much larger story. It's everybody's story, and it deserves to be told with dignity and accuracy and care. What's one moment or memory that captures the reality of ICE raids for you or someone you know? All right. What's one moment? Yeah, there's definitely a moment that stands out. I remember sitting at home. I was working from home, and seeing all of the posts on social media about the ice trade that was happening at a garment factory here nearby at the fashion district in downtown Los Angeles. And I remember seeing the truckloads of federal agents, the community members that showed up to resist, and just the violence that took place that day, the tear gas, the firearms that were present, the clashes between the agencies. And I think that was one of the moments that really stood out to me, because it kind of triggered my fight or flight mode. It was a moment where I had to decide if I really want to be a part of this fight, and to what extent, and to what extent am I willing to put myself on the line for our immigrant communities, and what would my role be in the immigrant rights movement. it was one of those moments where you see the fear and the disruption firsthand. And for me, capturing those scenes, capturing those scenes and documenting it is really like a pivotal point for me. And it shows, it humanizes our communities in a way that shows that we are more than one dimension, and we're not, criminals. We are neighbors. We're neighbors, soccer coaches. We are contributing members of society, people that you pass in the grocery aisle. We're here. Another moment that specifically stands out for me in the raids is how fast our communities get together to respond. I'm part of a rapid response network. I volunteer with them. I'm also part of a lot of group chats and, social media groups where documenting raids is one of the bigger part of the resistance that people don't necessarily talk about. So one thing that stands out to me is those moments of community where people come together and respond to the raids. And even when it's scary and you see the agents come in, even when it's scary and you see, the agents are there at a Home Depot, at a day laborer site, or at a car wash, and they are chasing people down or like attacking somebody, and you see the person being taken away, I just realized I'm like moving my mic around, and I hope it's picking up. But seeing how community members come together and know how to respond and know to record their face and ask them for their name, their birthday, a family member's phone number, what country they're from, just so that organizations on the ground can find them faster, has really been eye-opening to me. And that's something that has stood out to me, from here in LA to Chicago to now North Carolina, and just seeing how people are ready to resist is really meaningful to me. How do these situations affect families emotionally, especially children? Honestly, the emotional impact of this violent oh my God, the emotional impact of this violent immigration enforcement is huge. From the headlines and all of the news outlets to community forums and group chats and hearing from our community members firsthand, people are scared. For a mixed status family or somebody who is undocumented, a trip to the grocery store can be the difference between being here in the U.S. and being deported or being detained for an unreasonable amount of time. And a lot of the times, some people are afraid of being detained for legitimate reasons or because of their health. And this year alone in 2025 has been the deadliest year for immigration detention ever in the history of the United States. People are dying because of medical neglect at a record rate. So not only are people scared for themselves to go into a detention center and face that kind of neglect and violence, but also to be deported to a country away from their children and their family. But children are scared for their parents as well. When the raid started, as I mentioned before, my dad works in HVAC. So he goes to Home Depot, he goes to Lowe's to buy supplies, and then he goes to different work sites across Southern California. And I remember having to sit down with him and having to explain to him that his green card is not a layer of protection that once was, unfortunately. That now, if he had a run-in with immigration enforcement, that it would be to detain them first and then ask questions later. So I was really fearful for a period of time, for him to go to work, to to and from the store, knowing that if he was to be detained, that he would suffer like mental health and physical health risks. So I think for the children of immigrants, regardless of status, it has been a really scary time here in the United States under the second Trump administration. Another thing that's brought to mind is children in schools going to school and not knowing if your parents are going to be able to pick you up or not. That is scary. I can't imagine being a middle schooler or high schooler or even an elementary school kid being at school wondering if my parents are safe, if my mom is going to make it to my pickup, if my dad is going to be there to pick me up for soccer practice. Like, the mental toll that we are experiencing is heartbreaking. When you think about LA protests, what stands out most to you personally? You know, when I think about the LA protests, what really stands out to me is the incredible sense of solidarity. As a photographer, I saw so many different communities coming together, and people supporting each other, and so many people supporting each other, and a lot of really powerful visuals of unity. It wasn't just about like the protests themselves, and it wasn't just about immigrant rights, but it was a collective of social justice movements coming together, understanding that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. And when one marginalized group is under attack, other marginalized groups are also under attack. But people finding their voices and standing up for one another, that was pretty inspiring. And I think also people using their platforms, no matter how big or small, to speak out about the violent tactics that were being used and our immigrant communities being under attack, that was really inspiring as well. Do you feel the protests changed anything, or at least changed the narrative? I do think the protests made a difference. Maybe not overnight, but the protests definitely shifted the conversation. They brought more visibility to the issues that were often ignored, or maybe not at the forefront of like the social justice movement, and they made people pay attention. As somebody that was there on the ground documenting these moments, I could see how they created space for new conversations and really put pressure on our local leaders and state leaders to listen a little more closely. And additionally, I actually think that they paved the way for some real policy shifts, at least here in Los Angeles. The grassroots movement and the visibility really translated to local policies that limited ICE cooperation with ICE, and limited local resources collaborating with ICE, as well as visibility. Cut all that. But it also strengthened protections for our immigrant families, for them to feel a little bit safer in their communities. So it's really not about the day of the protest and feeling like one day of physical action is enough, but it really is like the small, ever evolving moments that lead to bigger changes down the line that really make a difference in people's lives. One thing that I focus on in my work in photography and videography and communication strategy is narrative change and how we shift the narrative. I think one of the most important part of the protest and through social media is showcasing our immigrant communities as members of our community. As members of our community, and not just I don't want to repeat like negative rhetoric, but showing the human side of the policy, of the negative policy, showing the human side of the policies and the human impact of violent ICE enforcement and what it really means. It's not just a number of deportations. It is countless families being torn apart, countless children without their parents, people without their brothers, their sisters, their aunts, their uncles, their grandmas. So countering the negative is one of the bigger parts of my job and my goal as a photographer. See, how you've seen communities come together during difficult times. One of the most inspiring things I've witnessed is just how resilient and supportive Los Angeles communities are. I've seen neighbors stepping up for one another, local organizations creating networks for mutual aid and support, and just a real sense of people saying that we are in this together. As a photographer and as an immigrant rights advocate, capturing these moments and being part of that mutual aid group and solidarity is really powerful. And it shows that even in tough times, people will find a way to come together. In the height of the raids and when ICE enforcement was at an all-time high, people really stepped up by offering to go to the grocery store for families, to run their errands for them, to take their kids to and from school. And I think little acts like that really show how big an impact a small hand can have. I think that's one of the most impactful ones. I mean, I often see going to the grocery store as like a hassle or something that I don't want to do. And I think when all of this started going down and people were scared to go to the grocery store, or I was scared for my parents to go to the grocery store, it just really gives you a new perspective and a new appreciation for what you have. And it really prompts you to check your privilege as a U.S. citizen or as somebody with a protected status here in the United States, to understand that our communities being under attack means a lot more than what people say. I don't know. You can cut that part. What do you think people often misunderstand about immigrant families in the U.S.? I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about immigrant families in the United States is that they're somehow any different than any of us. The truth is that these are families with the same hopes, the same dreams, and the same aspirations as any other family in the United States and in the world, and the same love for their kids as any other family. People oftentimes reduce immigrants to stereotypes or political talking points, and they miss the humanity. And as someone who tells stories through photos, I try to highlight that humanity and show that immigrant families are just like any other family doing their best. I think that's good. Next question. In your opinion, how are immigrants portrayed in media or politics, and how is that different from what you've experienced? I think there's often a gap between how immigrants are portrayed in the media or politics and what I see in real life. In the media, I feel like oftentimes immigrants are sometimes shown in a one-dimensional way, either as, unfortunately, a lot of times shown as just the victims or as some pawn in a political debate. But in my experience, immigrant communities are incredibly diverse. They are resilient, strong, and full of rich, everyday stories that often don't make the headlines or are left out of the news coverage and the media. So I try to use my photography and my social media platform as a way to show those real stories and to add a more human perspective that goes beyond the usual narratives. Another way that immigrants might be portrayed in the media or politics is, like I said, like victims. And a lot of the times, media will show only the scary or fearful videos or clips that they know will get engagement, like in the raids. But what they won't show sometimes are the reunifications, the happy endings of the incredible work that organizations are doing on the ground to help reunite families and to bring families together. Every every person that I've met, every immigrant community member that I've met has been incredibly grateful for the help that they have received and for advocates who are on the ground protesting, protesting and using their voice, and using their platforms to speak out for them. Yeah, they are some of the most incredibly grateful and heartfelt communities that I've ever met or worked with. How does the idea of home, what does the idea of home mean to you in today's climate? That so that question I think is really meaningful, and I know that it's like the point of your documentary, of your work, of your project. But for me, home is not just a physical place. I think it's a sense of belonging and a sense of safety. For me, I have lived alone for a little over 2 years now, and I have my home here in Los Angeles. This is my comfort zone, my safety. But I know that I also have a home back at my parents' house, and I also have a home in my cousin's house where I used to live. And home I think is really a state of mind, and I think it means somewhere where you can feel safe and you can feel safe being your true authentic self. And in today's climate, where so many immigrant and mixed status families are navigating uncertainty, home is about finding those spaces where you feel safe and you feel accepted and supported. I think a lot of my work is about helping families and helping people see that everyone deserves that sense of home, no matter where they're from. And I think as as a nation built on as a nation built on the backs of immigrants, we are built and run by immigrants. I think it is our duty to welcome people with open arms and to give them that sense of stability that they are seeking. Okay, last one. Looking ahead, what are your hopes for immigrant families in the U.S.? This year alone, in 2025, under the second Trump administration, I feel like I personally have been in a rapid response mode for months since he came in office. I feel like there is always something to respond to, always something to be mad about, and like we're constantly pushing to push the needle forward. And like we're having to fight 10 times harder for like a breadcrumb of humanity that, quite frankly, I don't think we're seeing in this moment. But looking forward, my hope is that immigrant families can live without fear, with the full dignity and opportunities that they deserve. I'd love to see a future where policies are more just and more humane, where families don't have to worry about being separated, where everyone is recognized for their contributions and humanity. And I think it's all about creating a society where home really means home for everyone. Yeah, I hope the United States can turn back to a place where immigrant communities can thrive, not just fight to survive. And I hope that people's eyes open up and join the fight for immigrant rights and immigrant justice. And I hope people can be a little bit more welcoming and more empathetic to newcomers to this land and people who have been here for decades and built a life here. I think that's it. Let me see my notes real quick before I stop. Okay, I think that's it. So I'll send this over to you as soon as possible. If there are any issues with the audio or anything, or if you want me to repeat anything, let me know. Or if you want to do this in person, we will find the time to do it. All right, cool. Thank you.
Ok, ma, puedes decir tu nombre, dónde eres, todo eso.
De mi nombre, de dónde soy. Ok, mi nombre es Sandra Martínez. Soy originaria de El Salvador. Tengo 50 años y vivo en Estados Unidos desde 1993.
¿Cuándo recuerda la primera vez que llegó a este país? ¿Cuáles eran sus sueños en ese momento?
Ok, la pregunta es ¿cuándo o cómo?
¿Cuándo recuerda la primera vez? ¿O cómo? Yeah. ¿Cómo?
Yeah, ¿cómo? ¿Cómo recuerdo?
Take your time. No tiene que ser de un solo.
Ok, ¿cómo recuerdo la primera vez? ¿Y qué más? ¿Y cuáles eran mis sueños?
¿Cuáles eran sus sueños?
Ok.
Yeah.
Ok. Cuando llegué a este país, recuerdo que salí de mi país por la violencia, por la inseguridad que se vivía y porque toda mi familia había emigrado a este país. Cuando llegué aquí, mis sueños eran estar cerca de mi familia y tener una calidad de vida mejor.
¿Cómo han cambiado esos sueños después de más de 30 años viviendo aquí?
Los sueños no han cambiado mucho, siguen siendo los mismos. Estar cerca de mi familia, que ahora tengo 3 hijos, mi esposo, hemos construido un hogar con ellos y siempre tengo la esperanza de estar juntos y de hacer lo mejor para ellos. Lo que ha cambiado es que hoy vivo con más inseguridad, con más miedo, con más desesperanza por problemas de migración.
Cuando firmó la salida voluntaria hace tantos años, ¿pensó que eso todavía lo afectaría hoy?
No, cuando firmé la salida voluntaria en 1997, nadie me explicó que eso perjudicaría toda mi estancia en este país. Siempre me dijeron que iba a poder arreglar de cualquier modo o cuando uno de mis hijos adultos pudiera pedirme o de alguna forma poder arreglar mi estatus legal. Y eso no me lo explicaron y era algo que no funcionaba de esa forma.
¿Quieres venir aquí para que veas la cámara?
No, después le preguntas a él las preguntas que le vas a hacer.
Oh. No, para que veas cómo se mira.
Estoy jugando, vos, si no te van a preguntar nada.
Aquí hay una silla, si quieres. ¿Es ok? Yo lo corto. We'll cut it in editing. Ok. ¿Alguna vez se ha imaginado cómo sería su vida si hubiera regresado a El Salvador?
¿Cómo fuera mi vida si hubiera regresado?
Como cuando tú dices como yo tenía como, no sé, 2, 3.
Oh,
Como si hubieras regresado conmigo en los 90s.
híjole, nunca he pensado en eso. Te dije que me mandara las preguntas.
Es okay.
¿Cómo sería mi vida? Pues realmente nunca lo he pensado porque nunca llegué con la idea de regresar a ese país lleno de violencia, de inseguridad, donde no hay trabajo y lo único que me esperaba era pobreza y soledad.
¿Ha pasado más años aquí en su país?
Sí,
¿Aún se siente conectada con El Salvador?
no. Considero de que no conozco las calles, ya no conozco la dinámica del país. Han sido más de 32 años en este país. He vivido más tiempo aquí que allá y me siento súper desconectada con él. No sabría qué hacer, no sabría cómo empezar de nuevo si me tocara regresar.
¿Cómo se siente al saber que en los papeles no pertenece al país que siente como su hogar?
Me siento triste, decepcionada, muchas veces fracasada, porque realmente he hecho todo por tratar de arreglar mi estatus legal en este país. He pagado abogados, he buscado formas, simplemente no he tenido la oportunidad porque las leyes cambian constantemente y se siente un ataque casi personal, como que no quisieran que arregláramos. Tratamos de ser personas trabajadoras, de no meternos en problemas, de cumplir las leyes en el país, pero simple y sencillamente a muchos no se nos ha dado la oportunidad.
¿Cómo ha protegido a sus hijos de ese miedo mientras los...
Hablándoles de fe, hablándoles de confianza, hablándoles de Dios, tratando de no comentar mucho mis miedos, tratando de ocultarles lo más que pueda mis inseguridades.
¿Qué siente cuando escucha sobre redadas de inmigración o nuevas leyes migratorias?
Siento mucho temor y inseguridad, me siento desesperada, me siento como perseguida. Trato de no salir de casa, trato de estar pendiente de cada noticia, me pongo con mucha ansiedad al extremo de enfermarme por estrés.
¿Qué ha sido lo más difícil emocionalmente de vivir así durante tanto tiempo?
No sé, estoy pensando, ¿qué le puedo decir? No me peleen los ojos. Hasta Danilo me hace así como, hey.
Sí, no, como te digo,
¿Qué ha sido lo más difícil emocionalmente de vivir así?
Tanto tiempo.
¿Qué ha sido lo más difícil? Lo más difícil es vivir con esa incertidumbre día con día, de no saber si sales y vas a regresar, de no saber cómo tus hijos van a afrontar esa soledad que va a quedar si me remueven a mi país, de cómo ellos van a poder seguir adelante, pues yo soy la base de ellos, la que los mueve para la escuela, la que les proporciona todo lo que necesitan. No sé, realmente eso me provoca mucha incertidumbre, inseguridad, temor.
¿Cómo le ayuda su fe y su familia a seguir adelante cada día?
Pues mi fe, mi confianza en Dios, me ayuda para darme paz, para poner en el control de Él mi vida. Mi familia es un gran apoyo, tanto emocional, me ayudan mucho. Me dan esa confianza, ese cariño que necesito, ese amor que te reconforta.
Cuando mira a su hijo menor y piensa en su condición medical, ¿qué le mantiene con esperanza?
Cuando veo a mi hijo que sufre de su condición médica, me da mucho temor porque no me lo podría llevar conmigo porque las condiciones médicas en mi país me han dicho que no tienen los mismos medicamentos que él toma en pero a la vez me reconforta porque es un niño fuerte y tengo la esperanza de que Dios me va a mantener aquí cerca con él.
¿Qué significa hogar para usted ahora? ¿Es un lugar o es su familia?
Hogar. La palabra hogar es mi familia, mis seres queridos, pero a la vez cuando conduzco por estas calles siento que este es mi hogar. No me veo en otro lugar sin sentir tristeza, nostalgia, pues tengo demasiados años viviendo aquí, aquí sé mi familia, de aquí son mis hijos y mis amistades, mis costumbres prácticamente son de este país.
Okay. ¿Todavía cree que las cosas pueden cambiar? ¿Que un día podría vivir sin miedo?
Sí, creo que pueden cambiar porque la esperanza es lo último que se pierde.
Si pudiera hablar directamente con los quienes hacen las leyes de migración, ¿qué les diría? Quiere ser grosera ahorita, ¿verdad?
¡Qué chica! Les diría que sean un poco más humanos, que nos den la oportunidad a las personas que hemos venido a este país a formar una vida, una familia, a llevar sus leyes, a trabajar, a tratar de no tener ningún antecedente malo y a tratar de unirnos a esta comunidad para hacer el bien.
Ok, finalmente, cuando sus hijos recuerden su historia, ¿qué quiere que vean en usted?
Híjole.
Sorry.
Sí, porque son 3 y los 3 quiero que vean algo diferente.
¿Puedes decir eso?
No, no sé qué quiero que vean de mí. Esa es la más difícil.
Si no estás cómoda, no tienes que...
Es que tengo que pensarlo. ¿Qué es lo que mis hijos quisieran? ¿Cuál es la pregunta?
Finalmente, cuando sus hijos recuerden su historia, ¿qué quiere que vean en usted?
¿Qué quiero que vean en mí? Lo único que quisiera es que mis hijos sepan que los he amado con todo mi corazón, a cada uno de ellos. Uno de ellos fue especial para mí. A cada uno de ellos los he querido de la misma forma y que no pierdan el cariño, el amor y el respeto por este país, que es el país de ellos.
Okay, thank you.
Me gustaría que me repitiera las 3 primeras preguntas para ver cuáles quedan mejor y así, ok, podemos ponerlas.
Okay. So, la primera fue...
El saludo.
Cuando recuerda la primera vez que llegó a este país, ¿cuáles eran sus sueños en ese momento?
Ok, cuando vine a este país por primera vez, traía muchos sueños conmigo, sueños de un cambio de vida, mejorar la economía, formar una familia, aprender de este país. Es que no sé cuál podría ser la respuesta. Ok, pero te dije otra, la primera.
Ya, es bueno tener 2.
Ajá, sí las acomodamos.
¿Cómo ha cambiado esos sueños después de más de 30 años viviendo aquí?
¿Cómo ha cambiado? Bueno, ha cambiado un poco porque algunos de los sueños ya se realizaron, que es tener a mi familia, tener a mis hijos. Es que no sé.
It's okay.
Ahí dejémoslo porque
Okay. Cuando firmó la salida voluntaria hace tantos años, ¿pensó que eso todavía le afectaría hoy?
cuando firmé la salida voluntaria, nunca supe las consecuencias de firmar una salida voluntaria, nadie me lo explicó y no tenía ni idea lo que eso significaba y lo que me podría afectar hasta el día de ahora. Si hubiese tenido la oportunidad de una explicación o de saber las consecuencias, nunca lo hubiese firmado.
Okay. Hoy te voy a decir cosas y lo que tú piensas, no es una pregunta, te voy a decir palabras.
Okay.
¿Qué tú piensas? Fe y fortaleza, el peso de la esperanza y antes y ahora.
El peso de la esperanza, esa pregunta no sé cómo tomarla. El peso de la esperanza.
¿Cómo todavía sientes esperanza con todo lo que está pasando y todo, encuentras la alegría en las cosas pequeñas, como este Sunday con familia, y cosas así.
Ok. ¿La primera cuál era?
No es una pregunta, es como...
Sí, la palabra, dímelo.
Fe y fortaleza, el peso de la esperanza.
Fe y fortaleza, Dios y mis hijos.
Okay, Victor, that's it. That's all.
¿Y las otras?
¿Cuáles otras?
Porque me diste 3 más.
No, that's it. Oh, that's it.